Hello and welcome to my Nikon ZF review. Today I'll be talking you through my experiences with the Nikon ZF, as well as showing you some photographs I've taken with it to highlight how well it works, and also showing you its high ISO performances too as well. I'll also be running it through its main features, and by the way, I have a video on the 15 settings I changed immediately as soon as I got the Nikon ZF. I'm going to leave that in the description down below too as well, because that might be very handy for you. I'll also be sharing what I love and what I hate about the Nikon ZF, as well as the video features too as well, of course. So come on, let's get into it and I'll talk you through my experiences with the Nikon ZF. This review was not sponsored by Nikon, but for full disclosure, they did send out the Nikon ZF to me for this review, but I haven't been paid to review this camera, and it's going straight back to Nikon again after I'm finished with it today. I picked the ZF for review as it has been on my should I buy it list now for quite a while. So getting back to the features of the Nikon ZF, we have a 24 megapixel full frame sensor, which has more than enough resolution for most photography genres and work. It has great low light performance with an ISO range of ISO 100 to ISO 64,000. Or in the extended ranges, it goes down to ISO 50 and up as far as ISO 204,800. The design then is simply gorgeous. Just look at it, it's a thing of beauty. But did you know Nikon have a secret detail hidden into this camera? More about that in a minute though. The fully articulating 3.2-inch screen has been something I've been waiting for a long time in a serious hybrid camera from Nikon. It's great for vlogging and I'm loving it so far. You could just hold it out like that and see yourself. The Nikon ZF also has 8 stops of VR built in. Now when you consider the Z8 and Z9 only have 6 stops, wow. Just wow! So speaking of stabilization now, this is one thing I don't really like about the Nikon ZF. If I shake the camera now, that is the in-body image stabilization in the Nikon ZF. Because unlike the Nikon Z8 and most other Nikon cameras, the image stabilization system does not park when the system is switched off. There's great dynamic range on this camera too as well, with 14.5 stops. That's just exceptional. And then we have crazy good autofocus performance with AF detection working down to minus 10 EV. Yes, minus 10 EV. We have eye detection AF for photos and videos, of course. We have bird, car, plane AF detection modes included as standard on the Nikon ZF. Then you have pre-release capture up to 30 frames per second in JPEG, or 30 frames burst mode in JPEG and 14 frames per second in RAW. We have dual card slots with an SD and a micro SD slot. Micro SD is not really an issue in case you thought it was. More about that later on though. This Nikon ZF also has pixel shift technology, giving you an image up to 96 megapixels in size. It has 10-bit internal H.265 N-Log recording, which for the price of this camera is just simply amazing. Then we have the voice memo feature, which is handy for taking down names or notes for each photograph during events. And of course we have great skin tones and colouring right out of the box, as you would expect from a Nikon camera. And lastly then we have monochrome mode, but don't diss it just yet, as this is a nice little feature to have. So that's a very rough run through of the main features, but before we get into the serious review, I just want to talk about the camera body itself. And just look at this beautiful design. Doesn't that take you back to the days when photography was just so much simpler? So if I just hold the camera up, just listen to those dials. There's a lovely solid clunky kind of a feel to them now, but the one thing is, don't be fooled by the looks of this camera. This camera is packed with tons of features, as I've already kind of explained, but more importantly, it has the brains to back it up. That's the really important part. As I mentioned earlier, this camera has a little secret you might not know, and that is the Nikon ZF dials are made of brass. Apparently part of the thinking here is, with a lot of wear over the years from adjusting the controls, you'll slowly start to seep through the black coating, and it'll slowly start to wear, and the brass is going to start showing you through, giving you this beautiful patina effect. This is something I wasn't aware of until I watched Ricky's video on the Nikon ZF a few months ago. Ricky simulated what these controls would look like after some serious wear and tear by sanding them down a bit. Yes, he actually sanded down the controls on the Nikon ZF. Now, I highly recommend you check out his video on the ZF and subscribe to his channel, as he has loads of great content, Nikon content on there. I have a link for that video and his channel in the description down below, so please do check that out. But just look at how nice this looks now. You can see how this camera will actually age with you and develop its own character, or style, so to speak, over time. Anyway, enough about that. Let's talk about build quality now. And this camera oozes quality in every aspect of the body. The camera body feels strong, and it's very, very solid, which is so nice, as we're now living in a world full of plasticky, flimsy, toyish camera bodies. I think if you travel back to the 1980s with this camera, it'd fit right in, and the only thing that'll probably give you away is the 3.2-inch beautiful display on the back, and the EVF too, of course. The buttons and the dials, again as you would expect from Nikon, are very responsive, and they seem to be fairly robust. So from a build quality perspective, the ZF is top drawer, and Nikon have built a thing of beauty here. The only point to note here is, as this is a solid camera, it's not light. It weighs around 710 grams. While that's not a deal breaker in any way, it's just important to note. Personally, I have found the weight of the Nikon ZF is really nice, as I find it helps balance the setup better when you're using longer or heavier lenses. So it doesn't feel like some kind of a plasticky toy at the end of the 70-200 f2.8, for example. Looking at performance and image quality now, the heart of the Nikon ZF is this very same 24 megapixel sensor that the Nikon Z6 II has, which is a great sensor, and I for one always like the images it created for me in the years of owning one. These are some of the photographs I've taken with the Nikon ZF, and you might recognise some of these photographs from my recent Nikon Z50mm f1.2 review, as these were shot with that lens on the Nikon ZF. By the way, I have a link for that review in the description down below. You really need to see that. So these were all shot in extremely low light situations and extremely challenging scenes, as the subjects were moving quickly and the light levels were changing dramatically. And I was also in a very large crowd of people, so getting a clear shot was extremely difficult even at the best of times. But as you can see, the Nikon ZF's autofocus delivered beautiful results with the greatest of ease. In fact, everything I've thrown at this camera was no issue at all. It also has the same shutter as the Z6 II, but that's where the similarities between these cameras end. Now, speaking of shutter, can I just say that using this camera and getting the same AF performance of my Nikon Z8 while still keeping that solid shutter sound is a pure joy to use. The Nikon ZF is an incredibly capable all-round camera that excels at landscape photography, still life, macro, portrait photography. Heck, it even does a really good job at wildlife and sports photography too as well, which is crazy. Like, this camera has about 14.5 stops of dynamic range, which is incredible. And that helps. It helps it to keep up with the likes of Nikon Z8. It of course has a dual base ISO, with its first ISO being ISO 100 and its second base ISO being ISO 800. So when I go to slightly darkly lit scenes, I automatically boost my ISO from, let's say, rather than going to ISO 400, I'll just go straight to ISO 800. The high ISO performance is really incredibly good. So to give you an idea, let's have a look at some high ISO photographs I've taken here with no noise reduction applied. So here we have a photograph shot at ISO 100. So let's zoom into 100% at the center. And as you can see, that image is perfectly clean. ISO 200 now, and that looks perfect too as well. At ISO 400, there is a tiny bit of noise now, and ISO 800 is perfect too as well. At ISO 1600, we're starting to see that noise magnifying, And then at ISO 3200, you can see that noise is starting to ramp up a small bit. For me personally, this is as far as I'm pushing the auto ISO on the Nikon ZF, and this is my auto ISO limit. But again, ISO 6400 is still looking good enough. It is noisier, and you might be perfectly comfortable with that. At ISO 12800 there now, again, you can see the noise is really starting to get bad here now. And at ISO 25600 now. And here we are at ISO 51200, and you can see we're starting to lose sharpness and detail. And then finally we have ISO 128,000, and as far as I'm concerned, that's completely unusable now. It is the same autofocus performance and modes of the Nikon Z8 and Z9, which makes it a great option for low light settings and fast moving scenes, as the subject detection modes do an amazing job. We all know how well the autofocus works in the Nikon Z8 and the Nikon Z9, and the ZF is exactly the same. It also has the same X-Speed processor as the Nikon Z8, meaning it's super quick and can handle nearly anything you throw at it. And trust me, I have tried the Nikon ZF in some really challenging situations over the last couple of weeks. The Nikon ZF has dual card slots, but unusually Nikon have gone for one SD and one micro SD card slot. Now, if you're thinking, oh no, that's a deal breaker for me as micro SD is useless, well, let me demonstrate how well micro SD does in this camera. So I have both an SD card and a micro SD card installed in the camera. On the bottom right hand corner, you can see R043 in brackets. That's saying there's 43 shots remaining in the buffer. So if I hold down the shutter button now, it's firing off, and you can see that R number is dropping lower and lower and lower, and there we go. So that's how long it took for the buffer to fill. Now, since I've stopped taking the photograph, the green light is on here, which means it's recording those images to both cards. So it's emptying out the buffer slowly. So I'll tell you when that stops. So in total, it took 20 seconds for the buffer to write completely over onto the micro SD card. Now, the one slight mistake I made here is the card I'm using is a 128 gigabyte micro SD card. That has a write speed of 90 megabytes per second, whereas the 256 gigabyte micro SD card has a write speed of 140 megabytes per second. So it actually goes about 50% faster than this. Now, I'm presuming Nikon chose micro SD due to the limited size available. But as you can see, it still does a really good job, especially when you consider the size of the card itself. Now, I have details on the micro SD card I used in the description down below too as well. There's also 8 stops of VR in body compared to the 6 stops the Z8 and Z9 offer. That's huge, and it means if you're shooting still life, you can handhold this camera down to crazy low shutter speeds. During my testing, I found with a 14mm lens, I could get a very good picture, even at half a second hand-holding the camera, which is completely nuts. The Nikon ZF also has pixel shift technology, which means you can capture very high-resolution photographs up to 96 megapixel file sizes with this super compact body. Now, to use this, you need a still subject and you need a tripod, of course. For 96 megapixel file sizes, you need the camera to shoot a 32 image burst, and once they're combined in post-processing via the Nikon software, the results are staggering, especially out of such a small camera body. Then we also have monochrome mode with 3 monochrome profiles to choose from. We have monochrome, flat tone monochrome, and deep tone monochrome. This is something I haven't used an awful lot, but if you shoot a lot of black and white images, this could be seriously nice for you, as the results are very impressive, and having that on a separate switch is also a nice little effect. For video shooters then, we have 10-bit internal H.265 N-Log recording, which is a huge advantage to have over the likes of the Z6 II or Z7 II, for example, as they need an external recorder as default. The flip-out screen then again for vloggers, that is incredibly handy. And then of course we have 4K 60p recording mode. Now, a point to note here is that there is some rolling shutter at 4K 60p in fast moving scenes, which does improve at 4K 30p, and at full HD resolution, it's gone. The sensor in the ZF is obviously not as fast as the likes of the Z8 and Z9, hence we're getting that rolling shutter effect. You can also get the Nikon ZF in 7 different colors, so you can match the camera to your character or to your style via the coloring tool as well if you want. So this brings us to my conclusion and the positives and the negatives of the Nikon ZF for me personally. The things I love about the ZF have to be its size, its awesome autofocus, the amazing build quality, and finally that flip-out screen for us vloggers, the high ISO performance, and the quality of the video this camera produces. In short, there's an awful lot to love about the Nikon ZF, but for me, these are the highlights of this camera. Now, there are a few things I don't like about the Nikon ZF, and the first one has to be its grip. It's just not there, and I found it very difficult to handhold it with heavier lenses attached. There is a solution here though. So what I got is, I bought myself a grip, and the grip I actually went for here, there's a few grips available. You can buy the smaller grip or you can buy the newer grip. The one I went for was the newer grip, and I went for the newer grip for a few different reasons. But firstly, let's look. You can actually see there's a reasonable grip there now, so it makes it a lot easier to hold the camera itself. So as you can see, the first negative I mentioned isn't really a massive negative. You can buy something for around 30 euros. That's going to solve that problem and make it an awful lot easier to handhold the camera. So problem number 1 is gone. So the second issue is the lack of a sensor shield. I would have loved to see a shield in place here to cover the sensor while you're out and about changing lenses. I can't understand why there isn't a shield in all mirrorless bodies now. And yes, I know it's easier to fit one in the likes of the Nikon Z8 as there is no shutter. So this now brings us to the massive problem I have with the Nikon ZF. And that problem is that I now really want one. I would use this camera for traveling around and just being out and about with my family, as well as a backup for my Z7 II or my Z8. So in short, I hate you, Nikon. You need to stop producing amazing cameras. It is becoming completely ridiculous now. Every model is just so stupidly good over the last couple of years. It is ridiculous. Now, I'm saying that, and I still haven't got my hands on the Nikon Z6 III for review to put it through its paces. So hopefully that's going to happen one of these days. Thanks again, Nikon, for sending this out. And also a massive thank you to you for watching. And I have several other videos on the Nikon ZF coming out soon, as well as a few more very interesting Nikon products. So make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. And see you out there, or see you in the next video.